Auschwitz, Poland. At the height of World War II, the most feared of all Nazi concentration camps. If there's ever been a hell on earth, this was it. More than 1 million Jews were killed here.
70 years ago on this day, one of the most vile and despicable acts by man against fellow man was brought to an end. Or so it was thought. Because 7 decades later, mankind is still fighting anti-Semitism and hate. And the world finds itself facing a new generation to educate and needing to find ways to ensure the slaughter of millions of Jews and others never happens again. Let's welcome to MidPoint. He is curator of the permanent exhibition at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Stephen Luckert joins us on the show. Stephen, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Ed.
Stephen, we talk about needing to educate generations, not to forget. I start with this because recently I saw a post on a website, and it had tweets, if you will, messages from people who had been to various concentration camps in Europe. They had visited them. And what they were tweeting was the restaurants weren't up to par, the restrooms weren't very clean, and that struck me because here these were people visiting the camps where millions died, and they were looking at it as more of a Disneyland, if you will, that the restaurants weren't right. Isn't it fair to say that we're losing a little bit of the knowledge of what these places stand for, and the need now is not just to keep these places operational, functional, so people can be there, but to make them understand what was there?
Well, I think it's important over the passage of time, and it's been 70 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, that we remind people of the importance of this history, why it's important to know about the Holocaust, about Nazi brutalities against the Jews and millions of other people, as well as the dangers of racism, of anti-Semitism, of intolerance in our own society.
How do we push that forward, though, so that people actually understand what 70 years ago today meant and why it can't be forgotten for another 7,000 years?
Well, Ed, I think it can be done in a variety of ways. I think through engaging educational programs, reaching out to millions of people around the world who may not have heard really anything accurate or anything about the Holocaust. And that's something that the museum is very much engaged in. We're doing a lot of work in different languages to reach out to the Middle East, so we're doing things in Arabic, Farsi, Urdu. We're doing things in Chinese and in various other languages. So we're reaching out to millions of new audiences to try to give them accurate information about what happened and to learn about the importance of this history.
Is it fair to say, and I know that this is difficult for some people to believe, but fair to say that there are those still, probably very normal people, average folks, maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, who still to this day deny that the Holocaust ever happened?
Yeah, I think that that's a danger that we see today, is that there are those small groups of people who deny the Holocaust in the face of enormous evidence. I think that what always has shocked me about Holocaust denial is that the survivors said it happened, the Allies said it happened, and the perpetrators said it happened. So that you have this huge body of evidence, of testimonies, of documents, and yet you have small groups of people who charge that it never happened. I think that's a danger because they're using social media, the internet to get those ideas across. But I think it's important for institutions like my own institution or Yad Vashem in Israel, the memorial sites in Europe, to kind of counter that and spread the truth about the Holocaust and what transpired more than 70 years ago.
When people come to the museum, what is the one thing that you believe they need to see, or maybe the one thing they need to see that will make the impression upon them as to what this was all about?
Well, I know that when people go through the museum, and particularly the permanent exhibition, one of the most potent segments of that exhibition are the shoes that we have on display that are on loan from the State Museum in Majdanek in Poland. And we have about 4,000 shoes. They were just a small sample of the hundreds of thousands of shoes that were found at Majdanek after liberation. But they make such an important impression on visitors who come to the museum, because you see shoes of men, women, and children, and it gives people a sense of the enormity of these Nazi crimes and also who they targeted. That is, even young kids, even infants, Jewish infants, weren't spared. And I think this is something people walk away with, something about the enormity of this and something about the victims. These shoes serve as silent witnesses of that horrible atrocity.
What I mentioned at the beginning was some people saying that a few places that they visited were simply not kept in very good shape. There have been a lot of reports in the last few years that these former concentration camps are falling into disrepair. Certainly age and time take their toll, but that certain things are falling apart, that they need to be preserved. Do you find that to be true, that there are some that are neglected, but that really need to be kept despite how heinous what happened on that site? They must be preserved, and you've got to spend the money, work a little bit harder, make sure that they are there and they are viewable by people on a day-to-day basis.
Well, Ed, I think it's so important that these sites be maintained. And this is a challenge because you're fighting against the elements. You're fighting against many of these sites are outside. The barracks are made of wood. They weren't meant to last for decades. And they're outside, so they suffer from the elements. And so this is something that places like the State Museum at Auschwitz or at Majdanek or the camps at Buchenwald and Dachau, they work to preserve that and to keep those memorials going. And they do a lot of important work, archaeological excavations, finding new evidence of what happened in these camps.
And just a reminder for people, at Auschwitz, we had European Jews and others, 1.1 million people. Poles, Romans, Soviet prisoners of war, prisoners of other ethnicities, including Germans, all died at this location. It was not just Jews, and that's why something like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and the permanent exhibition there are exceptionally important to history. Stephen, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes to join us. I look forward to visiting the museum next time I'm in D.C.
Well, thank you very much, Ed.
All right, take care. Here's something else that should not be forgotten. America and Russia right back to their old spy games. MidPoint continues.